Welcome to the Greg and Lisa show.
I'm Greg, and
And
I left this thing up for 2 days. It was Wednesday, now it's Saturday.
I
I left
know.
this thing up for almost 3 days.
Well, good job. Good job.
The magic of the internet helped us with
Yeah,
that.
isn't that the truth? Well, thank you for joining us for Christmas in July, the journey
Yes.
of Mary and Joseph this time. We're going to talk about a few things. But before we get started talking about them, we're going to cover some of the Jewish cultures of the first century. At the time, Mary and Joseph were
Right,
with
of
us.
course.
But before we get started, too, we wanted to talk about, we made a year's commitment to do this show, and in 8 weeks, our year will be fulfilled.
All right.
Can you believe it?
It's been fast, and
I know. In 8 more weeks, we will have done 52 shows.
it's crazy.
So
It's
it is
crazy.
crazy. So then we have to make a decision on whether we're going to carry on or not carry on, or what we're going to do, or where our commitment stands next.
Right, because as we've talked about, we don't have the largest number of subscribers in the world, but what is about tons of views, right, over the whole thing.
I think so far we're over 1,500.
Which is, is not a lot. We're not one of the big channels over here. However, that's 30 people a video or so.
Well, and if we're helping people and they're learning something, that's been our main goal.
But we haven't made the decision yet about what we'll do after that year, but just
No.
be on the lookout. 8 more weeks.
Yeah, we're on the countdown.
Well, we want to start off with this verse that I've been hiding behind.
Sure, why don't you go ahead and read it? It's not on my paper.
I know. I was going to say, I don't have it memorized.
It's for unto us a child is born, and unto us a child is given. But
so, there you go.
Yeah. We will discuss it a little bit as we go on.
So, and I will probably put it up on the screen, but for now I'm going to move the picture. That was pretty cool to have up.
You might as well go ahead and read it since you're taking it down.
Well, yes.
Verbatim.
Yeah.
Instead
I had a feeling it was...
Instead of my...
Obviously it was going to be one of the Christmas story ones. But
yeah.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
And where's that verse found?
Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6.
Yep. And that's from the Old Testament.
Right.
So back in the day, in the first century of Jewish weddings, we are going to talk about some of the things that, most likely would have occurred due to the current culture at the time that Mary and Joseph were getting married. And everything that was happening in their lives. So, there was a betrothal between Mary and Joseph.
Yep.
They were betrothed, and the groom at that time would submit a betrothal contract, and it could be either written or verbal, to the future father-in-law, making a proposal for their daughter to become his wife. And if the parents of the potential bride agreed, at that point, then the couple would become engaged.
I don't mean to laugh, but I'm picturing taking, a prenup to the prospective father-in-law.
Well,
and it's not really like that, but
it kind of is, because also what they do, it's called a widow's agreement or a divorce pledge, a widow's settlement, and it's to be paid should the marriage dissolve. And one of the earliest marriage contracts was found in a cave at Elephantine, Egypt. And it's dated from July 3rd of 449 BCE. And currently it's in the Brooklyn Museum. But basically that marriage contract stated that, if she should become a widow or if the marriage should be dissolved, that they're going to pay a certain sum. And at that time it was 400 denarii, and which equals to about $24,000. So they had it all covered back then with a marriage contract and
that's basically a prenup, right? It kind of is. I mean, not exactly, but I guess I laughed. I laughed initially, but that's almost exactly what it is.
It is. But some of the traditions back there for the marriages, the girls were married between the age of 12 and 17 years of age, with the average being about 13
Now,
years
have you met a
old.
teenager? That's crazy.
It is crazy, that's for
Is it
sure.
different? I mean, if
Yeah,
that's just culturally what it was, then
yeah,
that's
that
all
was
you
what it
knew,
was.
and you were
Yeah,
raised with that. So I laugh at it now, but it would have been
yeah,
perfectly normal.
yeah. And the bride goes to the groom's house, and it's a large dance party. A feast is held. And, the local villages and customs may have varied a little bit, but the basic was that they carried the bride in a carriage to the groom's house.
Okay.
And so a lot of times, the entire village was involved because it was a big celebration and the crowds applauded, and they, might have played
Yeah.
music and danced on the streets as the bride
Yeah.
was going by. Kind of just like, what they do in England when, you know, the royals got married.
Well.
They lined the streets, and just like you do in a parade, it was
Yeah.
a big event.
Yep.
So,
And a lot of times, these would have been maybe smaller villages, not
mm-hmm.
always, but I mean, everybody would come out for this.
Yeah, they would.
Everybody.
Yeah. And the bride wore some type of a crown on her head.
Yep.
And
Okay.
sometimes the people along the way would have carried lamps or torches as part of the procession. And when the bride arrived at the groom's house, the festivities would begin, and they would break out the drums and the
Wow.
tambourines.
Don't get too wild there.
Yeah. And then there was a wedding feast, and sometimes it would last for a week. And at some point in time, a
That's right.
benediction would be held, and they would become man
Somebody
and wife.
remembered to say something during the
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they would become man and wife. But it was a big, huge event.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it was celebrated for a week and
Yeah.
by the entire
Yeah,
village.
and they're small villages, maybe
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in our terms, but you think about everybody in your town or city or
Mm-hmm.
even just neighborhood,
Yep.
every single person coming out.
I know.
It's kind of
Yeah.
unheard of. Well, I mean, it's not unheard of because
Right.
we're hearing of it, but today it's kind of unheard of to have something like that happen.
Yeah, it is. So,
So we have another Bible verse here. Matthew chapter 1, verses 24 and 25. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had given birth to a son, and he named him Jesus.
yeah.
The patience that Joseph, by the way, put in today's terms is that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. But even though their wedding feast wasn't mentioned in the Bible, just because it wasn't mentioned doesn't mean that they didn't have
Oh,
one.
right, right,
Yeah.
of course.
And that, due to the cultural pressures and that was pressed upon them at that time, they most likely had one, even with their extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah.
Mary and Joseph were already engaged at the time that Angel Gabriel visited Mary. And,
Mm-hmm.
so their marriages or engagements usually lasted about a year at that
Oh,
time.
right, yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally right.
Yeah.
Just because it wasn't documented, I
You're
mean,
right.
that doesn't necessarily make it true. Now, we don't think of those things in the same way we do,
Right.
scripture and what God tells us to do. But of
Right.
course, cultural things
Right.
would have
Correct.
happened.
Yeah. So, but as of today, there'd be, and there are, 148 days left till Christmas. So I've been thinking about, Mary over the last few weeks or so. And I was thinking, right now she'd be 4 to 5 months pregnant. And, she was anticipating the birth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. She was living somewhat of a normal, life with Joseph during this
Yeah,
time.
and like anybody else, kind of
Yeah.
average, whatever middle class was back then. Nobody had a lot of money unless you
Right.
were super rich, but they were,
Right. And she shared her pregnancy with her cousin Elizabeth, who was also pregnant. And, when she was visiting Elizabeth, you know, Elizabeth was pregnant at the same time with John,
Mm-hmm.
and John jumped in the womb, signifying that, he realized that Mary was carrying the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically he was, stating that, Mary was going to deliver God, the Son of God. So, but if we look at their journey to Bethlehem,
Sure.
there are some facts. And so the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem is approximately 90 miles. Okay.
Yep.
And, you know, some of the scholars have said that it's probably took them about 4 days to make that journey. And they were considering 8 hours a day at 2.5 miles per hour.
And that doesn't sound like a lot, but 2.5 miles an hour would a lot of us do walking on a treadmill, and I don't know anybody who could keep that up for 8 hours. That's
Well,
a
yeah, and really, I think it probably took them longer because I can't imagine, you know, Joseph would have to be concerned with, you know, their health, their safety, Mary being so, you know, in late stages of pregnancy. And so I'm sure he didn't, you know, do the grind to get her there. Plus, it was uphill a lot of the ways.
no, yeah, he
And
wouldn't have.
so, you know, I would think it
Yeah,
probably took them more like a week to get there, you know.
it could have. I mean, I
Yeah.
suppose that's not an important detail, but that would be pretty impressive if two
Yeah.
people, with one of them being a pregnant woman, could keep up 2.5 miles an hour for 8 hours.
Well, yeah, and you know they have to think about you know just the thieves and the wild
Well,
animals
that's
and
right.
everything
They
that's
weren't just
happening.
walking in the suburbs.
No,
Yeah,
they didn't have a sidewalk to
yeah,
walk
they
on.
didn't have anything like that. Yes.
Yeah. So, and the Magi, you know, they were most likely diviners, and you know they looked at the stars a lot to get perspective, but they came from the east, and that's thought to be from Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 900 miles
Whew.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they, you know, most likely didn't see Jesus until somewhere around January 6th or the 13th. And, you know, the Greek Orthodox celebrate Christmas on January 6th.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, you know, there is, you know, some people that think that they didn't see him till he was a toddler. There's because of, you know, Herod wanting to kill the boys that are 2 years or and younger
Yeah.
because they're thinking, you know, it was a 2 year thing. But basically, he was the, you know, the three kings didn't come at the time that, you know, Jesus was born,
Well, yeah. I mean
you
that's
know.
the nativity scene.
Right.
Shows this kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
it's not doesn't really change the facts of what
No,
happened at all.
no,
It's fun stuff to think about sometimes
it
and
is.
map out, but
And basically, it was all who came to see Christ born. It didn't mean that it was on that night.
yeah,
You know, I mean, the shepherd and the lambs were there, the animals were
yeah.
there, and the three
I didn't know
kings
that thing about
came.
the Greek Orthodox
Mm.
celebrating January 6th. And by the way, there's no crime, I think, not celebrating it December 25th.
Oh, no,
But
no,
just interesting.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah. So, the question is, why did Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem to begin with?
So the first point, participate in the census that Caesar Augustus ordered, so they could be counted, and mainly for paying taxes.
Yeah,
A lot like the censuses we do.
right,
They just had to go in and report.
right,
We send mail back, or I think it's still done through the mail. Yeah, the last one
yeah,
was still through the
yeah.
mail.
It was. And also, Joseph's home city was Bethlehem in Judea. So, Bethlehem at that time was also called David's city. And Joseph was a descendant of David. And so he had to go back to his hometown. And truly, everything happened, you know, as a result of God's
Yep.
will.
Fulfilling the prophecy in Micah 5, verses 2 and 3, which talks about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem.
Right.
This was all planned out.
Yeah, it was. It's all part of God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now, you know, we see or we think or, you know, people say that Mary, you know, probably rode on a donkey on their way to Bethlehem. It's depicted in a lot of
Sure.
pictures and how
Yeah.
they got there, even though there's no mention of that in the Bible. But it's not an impractical point
Well,
because of
no.
going up and
And
downhill and
honestly, even at the speed, like, show me a donkey that's going to go 2.5 miles an hour for 8 hours.
yeah, yeah.
They're not. This is not a fast animal. We're not on
No.
racehorses.
No, and again, that's another thing where Joseph would have wanted to take care of Mary. You know, she
Yeah.
was carrying the Son of God in her late stage
Yeah.
pregnancy, and to try
I
and,
mean, also
you
he's
know,
just
look out
he's
for
a
her.
man concerned with his brother. Well, they were
His
just
wife,
engaged.
yeah,
His wife. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so when you think about it, it's been thought of kind of in a bookend effect because they think if Mary was riding to Bethlehem on a donkey with Jesus in her womb, that's kind of the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus's beginning is
Oh yeah. Yep.
coming. But then Jesus rode on a donkey going to Jerusalem, and that was the beginning of his death, you
It's very
know.
true.
And so you have to think about it. But it's just amazing, really, when you think about it.
Sure.
How people, had transportation and how they got from one place to another back in the day. Um, so really, it was no picnic for them.
Well, no, I mean, you couldn't hop in a car, put the kids in the back, give them something to play with, stop at the service plaza.
Yeah.
Stuff didn't exist.
Right.
This
Right.
was rough traveling. So
Yeah.
I think next we're going to talk about the route that Mary and Joseph traveled.
Yeah.
So in Luke chapter 2, verse 4, it says that Joseph went up from Galilee to Judea because the city of Bethlehem is elevated 2,543 feet above sea level, which is 1,493 feet higher than Nazareth. And we're talking about that, rise over the 90 miles they must have traveled. I mean, that's a good hill. It's
It
steady.
is. It
It's
is.
not like you're
Yeah.
climbing a mountain, but that's a steady hill.
It is. Had lots of places for thieves to hide, lots of places for wild animals to come out at.
I can only imagine, and the animals, like,
Yeah.
it wasn't developed like we are. Like, animals would have just been out there
Oh, yeah,
on
they
those
would.
routes.
Yeah. Yeah. But Bethlehem is in the Judean mountains and it makes for a rugged terrain, during their journey. And they would have had to allow for the weather, the thieves, the dangerous animals, the surrounding woods. So
Yeah,
it wasn't an easy trek,
not at
you
all.
know. And just to think about, where did they sleep? Did they pitch a tent? You
It's
know?
conceivable, some kind of
Yeah. Did they find
structure
a
or
cave?
shelter or caves. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, those are kind of the best case scenarios, right?
Right.
Make some kind of tent with some sort of fabric, find a cave,
Mm-hmm.
or just on the ground, hope you can start a fire or something to
Right.
keep warm. And
Yeah. So after their journey, they arrived in Bethlehem, and all the rooms were filled in the end because the census was happening and everybody was returning to their hometowns for,
yeah,
to be counted.
foreshadow what we see today when there's a big event in the city and nobody can get a room anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, no, not exactly,
Yeah.
but it's
Well, now that we have Airbnb.
well, but it goes to show that a lot of the things we experience today, they're not new.
No,
We have a
right.
different cultural face on some of these
That's
things,
right.
but they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but Luke 2:7 said, And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the
And
inn.
that one was from the New King James version.
Yes.
Just for, I like to note that one
Yeah.
just because it's a little,
Right.
I mean, it's a little different because it's somewhere between. It's not quite all the way King James
Right.
translation wise.
Yeah. So their stay in Bethlehem, though it was short lived due to King Herod's fear of the promised power of Jesus. He was afraid of losing his superiority, his reigning, his power.
It's pretty rational fear, actually.
Well, yeah, but I think it's kind of irrational when he isn't even born yet.
Right.
He's only a baby.
A baby's gonna, and he would have known the governmental, climate and how the monarchies work, and kid can't just. It's just not exactly how it works. I mean, granted, he's afraid of the Lord coming down and doing something. That's one thing, but he's talking about a baby,
right? And so for him to send out a decree that everybody is 2 years old and younger is to be killed.
Well, that's the irrational. That's having some fear and trepidation about the situation. Normal. Doing something like that.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. So when an angel in the night warned Joseph to leave Bethlehem, he did. He took Mary and Jesus and he left for Egypt, where they stayed until King Herod's death.
Okay.
So, but the greatest gift of all, which, we talk about it at Christmas time, but it's always, was the birth of Jesus Christ. And, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, the nativity, a lot of times without even thinking about, Mary and Joseph, what they lived through, during the 9 months of pregnancy, their travels,
We read about these things in the Bible, like these are biblical heroes, and we also put kind of a mythic figure behind them, which is not always wrong, but also this is two human beings.
Right. And the Bible even talked about, when Joseph learned that, Mary was going to be with child, he didn't really want to marry her. But he didn't want her to be embarrassed or shamed. So his intent was to marry her, and then after the baby was born, was to divorce her.
Yeah, and
And
that's
you know,
he's not. I don't think he's cruel for thinking about that. That's the culture he was living in, and
yeah,
he's just thinking. It didn't quite go down that
mm-hmm,
way, but he was
yeah.
just thinking about what to do.
Well, and Mary, she didn't know what to think
Yeah.
either, because people were, I'm sure, were talking behind their backs and
Oh
thinking,
yeah.
about everything.
As normal as
Right,
a unmarried woman being pregnant in those
right,
circumstances would be nowadays. Back then, that's
yeah.
literally unheard of.
Right, and then not only that, you think about, she's carrying, the Son of God. You know, how awesome is that? But what a responsibility is that to
Oh
know
yeah.
that you're carrying, the Son of God.
She had to ground Jesus. I can't even. Well, he
Yeah.
probably didn't do anything wrong, right?
Yeah. So,
Just no,
but it,
it's a funny thing to think about, but
yeah. Well, and he
ultimately,
he experienced everything that we experienced
well,
and
yeah,
did,
yeah, yeah. Because I
So,
think it's probably important to realize that just because he didn't sin doesn't mean he wasn't a
right.
wild kid at
Yeah.
times.
Well, yeah. Well, that's just like when he took off and went and taught in the temple, and his mom and dad couldn't find him. He was 12 years
Yes.
old.
Yep.
He just went, and he couldn't
Yeah.
understand why his mom and dad were upset with him because they couldn't find him because he was in the temple teaching. You know, so he did things that a
Well,
typical kid
well,
would
yeah, yeah,
do.
yeah.
So. But right now, we're about 5 months away from Christmas. And Mary would be 4 to 5 months pregnant right now. And she's preparing for the birth of the Christ child. And we can only imagine that,
Right.
you know? So the question is, what are you doing to prepare for Christmas to celebrate Christ's birth?
And watching this show is a good step. I'm
Yeah?
kidding. I'm kidding. I mean, it's not the worst step you could take, but it's really not
No.
the point.
No.
Because the next question after that is, what are you doing to prepare to see Jesus one day?
Right. That's
Because
right.
whether you've already passed and you've gone through the judgment, or
Mm-hmm.
you're here when he when he
Right.
comes back.
Right. And because we've talked often about we're not promised tomorrow and we don't know when we're going to meet him.
Yeah.
And so we're to always be prepared. But what are you doing to be prepared, to see Jesus? Or are you even preparing?
Right.
Um, you know. But at Christmas, the wise men brought, three gifts to the birth of Christ for the Christ child. And we buy gifts, at Christmas time for those that we love.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a Bible verse that says it's better to give than to receive.
Sure.
And so, start preparing now for Christmas that's coming in 5 months. Buy two or three gifts a month to
Yeah.
kind of relieve some of that
Yeah.
financial pressure or
And
tension, or start making
yeah.
gifts, or
Yeah.
start planning your shopping
Yeah.
list or what you need to look
Yeah.
at.
My parents always used to do this. Your daughter does this. I do it to a certain degree. Just seeing something throughout the year you think
Mm-hmm.
somebody would like, that's on sale, some small thing.
Right.
You can buy it. Somebody will like it.
Mm-hmm.
Put it away, and you can kind of slowly build up a small stash for
Right.
somebody.
Right. And, we've talked before about the two best months to shop is January and July, because those are clearance months, because that's when a lot of the retailers have to pay taxes on their current inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So they try to get rid of that inventory, before they have to pay taxes on it. So, we have to start looking ahead. And a lot of times that is why there is Christmas in July. It is to start preparing people to start thinking. It's not because they want to over commercialize Christmas, but sometimes people are creatures of habit. They wait till the last minute instead of
Yeah.
planning ahead. And it's kind of like your relationship with Jesus Christ. You think you have plenty of time, to start that relationship, or say, seek God before you take your last breath, but you don't always. And
Yeah.
so it's called, you always have to be prepared.
And it's you see this a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and you certainly don't want people to be terminally ill, but a lot of folks I know who
Mm-hmm.
have been there, their faith is more on fire than almost anybody that I've ever seen at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah, because they know they're going
They
home.
know,
Yeah.
and that's aside
Yeah.
from whether that person is really prepared or not, but
Mm-hmm.
it shows the urgency, and you need to
Right.
have a certain degree of that.
Right. And so, we talked about the gift giving and that
Mm-hmm.
portion of Christmas, but spiritually, you know, are you ready to see Jesus one day? That's a question that you have to take up with the Lord.
Right.
And you
And
have to have that personal relationship. So, don't wait till Christmas comes to start thinking about
right,
Christ.
right,
The spirit and the feeling and love of Christmas is supposed to be 365 days a
right.
year, 24/7. It's not just supposed to be,
Yeah.
December 25th.
And it's a tough question because we try to answer that and we often think, well, I'm not doing it perfectly, so I guess no, I'm not ready. But, that's not the
Mm,
point. You have to pray about that, right? That's
you
not
do.
necessarily a question you can just answer yourself and think of real quick.
Yeah. No, and you have to seek him now. You have to seek forgiveness. You
Yep.
have to work on building that relationship with him. And, it is a personal relationship. Your relationship with him is different than my
Yep.
relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
But the part is to have that relationship,
Right.
to read the Bible,
And
to,
yeah.
find that Bible based church and, start being a part of the family of God. So why wait 5 more months to get started?
Right. Not to say that December, in that season isn't kind of a special time. It certainly is. And a lot of people who don't go to church for the rest of the year are walking into churches, and people just generally seem to be more receptive about talking about God then. But,
Yeah, I
you know,
mean,
that doesn't mean you just do it in December, right?
no, no, you have to always.
Yeah,
Um, I got a text from my friend Denise today, and
sure.
she's a great follower of Christ, and she posted a Bible verse on a mirror and one of the places that she was today, and she says, "I just love being an employee of Christ." And when you think about it, that's our job. We're called to share Him, no matter how you do
Yeah,
it.
he doesn't give you any time
Right?
off, though.
No, He doesn't, and you don't get to
that's
retire.
that's true. That's another thing too.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever met a retired pastor and you didn't know they were retired, you would have
Yeah,
never guessed this person's retired because
that's right.
they're often as active or more,
Right.
just in different ways.
Right,
But
right. And our gifts and our talents change as we
yeah,
age because, we can't do what we could always do when we were younger.
but you can do things you could. I mean, you
That's right.
gain new things.
Right. You do. There's
So
there's always something that you
that's the
can do
thing.
for the
We
kingdom of
sometimes get
God.
sad about getting older and things changing, but you do get to do new stuff.
Yeah, you
You
do.
have new knowledge. You have
Right.
new.
Right.
You often say, "Oh, if I knew what I knew now." Well, you don't, but you do know that stuff now, so
Yeah. Yeah.
you can act on it now.
Right. And so what we want to leave you with today is to
Start
start
now.
now. Yeah.
So God came, He
He lived.
lived, He gave His life, He rose again, and yeah, He's coming.
He's
He
coming
will
again.
come
He will
again.
come again. So the question is, are you ready?
And that little string of sentences we just read, that's essentially the Bible.
It is.
If it's
Yep.
not exactly. There's a
Right.
lot more in there, but
Right. Right.
that's kind of the point you need to get.
Right. It is. So you need to think about it. You need to think about it. God came.
Hmm.
He lived. He gave his life for us. He rose again. He will come again. And are you ready?
Yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
powerful sacrifice because
Mm.
Jesus, fully God and fully man, so he's sitting up there on that cross, knowing, what, I could get down from here anytime I wanted, probably, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to experience this like a human.
Right.
So it's not like he was standing up there putting some kind of divine shield on himself and just putting on a
No.
show.
No.
And I know we're talking about Christmas, but of course, it leads to that, and that's where I
Right.
go when we start asking if are
Right.
you ready?
Right. Well, right. And, we have to also look at the fact that, Christ wasn't running to the cross. He asked to have that cup removed from him.
Yeah, yeah.
He asked for, God to take it away from him if it was God's will. God's will was for him to die on the cross. So he did it. He did it anyways. And so everything that God did while he was on earth, whether he was mocked or lied to or persecuted or, hated, he did it
I mean,
anyways.
he was asking God to forgive, the people who were stabbing him with the
Yeah.
spears, and like,
Right. What
good
he
grief,
said
I
on the
can't, I
cross.
can't even
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
Like, even if you're a person who wouldn't necessarily be angry at those people, you're probably
Mm-hmm.
not going, well, please forgive these.
Yeah. Forgive them for they know not what they're doing, and it is. So, but that was, part of God's plan. God sacrificed his son on earth for us. And so I think, the least of what we can do is, to follow Christ and live the way He's asked us to live, and to do what He's asked us to do. Absolutely. And to be ready, at any time to be ready, and to, lead by example, and how we interact with people, and how God uses us with the different gifts that He gives us. And so that's our job, is to keep reaching people for Him.
But yeah, and as we've talked about, that whole, I mean, Mary and Joseph and the baby. I mean, the biblical story begins many thousands, thousands of years before that point. I'm not here to debate the whole how long that all took, but a very long time before. But that's they brought Jesus into the world. So
and then there's 33 years before.
Yeah, it's a huge piece of history.
Yeah, it is.
In 33 years, and he really only had a couple years of ministry in that.
Yeah, about 3 years, I say.
He was, when he was a kid, he was still obviously running almost to the temple and doing those things, but his real, all the most of it was only about a 3-year period.
Yeah, about a 3-year period. So that's our question for you today is, think about Mary and Joseph. Think about how you feel at Christmas. And I do leave my Christmas stuff up all year round because I want it to be a constant reminder that we are supposed to live 365 days.
I kind of thought you did that because you just didn't want to take the tree down. But
no, I use it to explain to the kids.
Yeah, no, and it's, what? Yeah. If you're somebody who has that at home, I think it's great. It's a fine decoration. There's stuff, there's a lot worse things you could have up there than a Christmas tree throughout the year.
Yeah. But anyways, think about how you treat others, and think about what you're doing, and start planning ahead for the holidays. They're all around the corner, and just, relieve some of that stress. Seek God, pray, look up to Him, look to Him for your needs. And, answer that question between you and Him. Are you ready?
Yeah, and that's really crazy to think about, because we could pass at any time. God could show up in the basement, and that could be it. I mean, He doesn't say how. It's probably not going to be right here in my basement, but
no. But He says He's going to come like a thief in the night.
Whatever spot He shows up in, it'll affect me just as much as if He were right here.
Right. So that's our Christmas in July. It's our journey with Mary and Joseph, and we just hope that maybe you learned something today, but that we gave you something to think about, and some food for thought.
And if people we don't often talk about that angle of it, so it's been really fun to really look at Mary and Joseph there for a bit.
So that's it for this week.
Yep.
So we'll see you next week on the Greg and Leisa Show.
You want a joke? I say we haven't done that much laughing. I got one, Okay. This is for the Star Wars geeks of us.
Okay.
So you may not get this, but I know somebody out there will. Why can't you ever email a picture to a Jedi?
I don't know.
Because attachments are forbidden. You're supposed to get married and all that. Okay. Bye. I'm going to stop talking. See you next week.